Please welcome Richard Dean Anderson.
Picture this. You're one of the biggest stars on television. Studios are throwing millions at you. Fans around the world know your name. And then one day, you just disappear. You walk away from it all. That's exactly what happened to Richard Dean Anderson, the man who made MacGyver a household name and spent 10 years saving the galaxy in Stargate. But why did he vanish? The answer will surprise you, and it might just change how you see Hollywood forever. Most people think Richard Dean Anderson retired because he was tired or old. That's not the real story. The truth is much deeper, and it starts way before he became famous. You see, Anderson learned something about life that most actors never figure out. And when he did, he made a choice that cost him millions but saved his soul. Let's go back to the beginning. Richard Dean Anderson wasn't born to be a star. He came into this world on a freezing January day in 1950 in a tiny town in Canada. His family packed up and moved to Minnesota when he was just 3 days old. His dad was a teacher who played jazz music at night. His mom was an artist. Their house was always filled with music, paint, and creativity. But they didn't have much money. Richard learned early that every dollar mattered. As a kid, Richard had one obsession: hockey. He wasn't just good at it. He was incredible. Professional scouts were already watching him play when he was still a teenager. Hockey wasn't just what he did. It was who he was. He dreamed of playing in the big leagues. He could almost taste the success. And then, in one terrible moment, it all came crashing down. Richard was 16 when it happened. During a particularly rough game, he collided with another player and broke his arm. It was bad, but athletes get hurt all the time. He figured he'd heal up and get back on the ice. But just 3 weeks later, disaster struck again. He broke his other arm, and this time it was serious. Really serious. He spent 3 months in the hospital. Doctors had to put pins and plates in his arm just to hold it together. They warned him he might never move it properly again. Imagine being 16 years old and watching your entire future disappear in an instant. The scouts stopped calling. His teammates moved on without him. Richard fell into a dark place. He was depressed, angry, and lost. But sometimes when life takes away one dream, it plants the seeds for another. While he was stuck in that hospital bed, unable to play the sport he loved, he started paying attention to something else his dad was involved in: acting. His father directed school plays, and Richard had always been around them. But now, with nothing else to do, he really started watching. He joined the drama club. He performed with casts still on his arms. And slowly, something magical happened. Acting gave him something to hold on to when everything else had slipped away. It wasn't hockey, but it was something, and that something would eventually change his life forever. Richard's childhood taught him to be tough and take risks. When other kids were playing it safe, he was attempting crazy stunts. At 10 years old, he decided to bike from Minneapolis to Duluth. That's a 100-mile journey. He didn't tell his parents the full plan. He just got on his bike and started pedaling. He made it 50 miles before his little body gave up, and he had to turn back. But even then, he didn't see it as failure. He saw it as an adventure. When he turned 17, his appetite for danger had only grown. He decided to bike across the entire country, from Minnesota all the way to Alaska. We're talking about over 5,000 miles of mountains, bad weather, and dangerous roads. He did the final stretch completely alone. 33 days with no backup, no support team, just him and his bike. Most people would call that crazy. Richard called it living. He learned to scuba dive, bought motorcycles, and would jump off school roofs for fun. One winter, he decided he wanted to set a world record by living in an igloo. So he built one himself and stayed in it for 3 days. He nearly froze to death, but to him, that was just another challenge. This wasn't reckless behavior. It was preparation. Richard was teaching himself that he could survive anything, handle any pressure, and push through any obstacle. These weren't just teenage adventures. They were training for the life he didn't even know was coming. In 1976, Richard made the biggest gamble of his life. He dropped out of college and moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a dream and determination. He had no connections, no guarantees, and barely enough money to survive. He took whatever jobs he could find, including one of the strangest gigs in Hollywood history, working with whales at a marine show. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him how to stay calm under pressure and perform in front of big audiences. His first real break came when he landed a role on General Hospital. This wasn't just any soap opera. It was becoming the biggest daytime drama in America. Richard played Dr. Jeff Weber for 5 years and appeared in over 600 episodes. He was part of something special, and people in Hollywood started to notice. He had something that couldn't be taught, natural charisma and the ability to make even the most ridiculous storylines feel real. But Richard wasn't content to be just another soap opera actor. He started taking roles in other shows, proving he could do comedy, drama, and action. He appeared on The Facts of Life, The Love Boat, and several other popular series. Then came 2 big chances that almost ended his career before it really began. He was given lead roles in 2 different CBS shows, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and Emerald Point NAS. Both shows were canceled after just 1 season. 2 major failures like that can destroy an actor's career in Hollywood. Producers start to think you're bad luck. Agents stop returning your calls. But Richard didn't give up. Instead, he watched, learned, and figured out what audiences really wanted. He was preparing himself for something bigger, even though he didn't know what it was yet. In 1985, everything changed when he auditioned for a new show called MacGyver. Richard did something unusual during his audition. He kept his glasses on. He wasn't trying to look cool or tough like other actors. He just showed up as himself, honest and real. The producers weren't looking for another typical action hero. They wanted someone audiences could believe in, someone who seemed genuine. Richard got the job. Here's where it gets interesting. Richard had never done stunt work before, but he convinced the producers to let him do most of his own stunts anyway. 70% of those dangerous scenes you watched, that was really him, not a stunt double. He believed in doing things himself, even when it was risky. The show became a massive hit, running for 7 seasons and making Richard a household name. MacGyver was different from other action shows. The main character didn't use guns, and neither did Richard in real life. Instead, MacGyver used science and creativity to solve problems. Parents loved it because it was smart and nonviolent. Kids loved it because it made science look cool. The word MacGyver even became a verb. When you fix something creatively, you MacGyvered it. But success came with a terrible price that fans never saw. In 1987, while filming a simple running scene, Richard stepped into a hidden hole. He didn't just twist his ankle, he seriously injured his back. One of his discs exploded, sending shooting pain down his leg. He couldn't walk properly, but he refused to stop working. For a year and a half, he filmed episodes while taking painkillers and dealing with constant agony. He didn't want to show weakness or use stunt doubles. The damage was permanent. Doctors warned him about nerve problems that would last forever. He finally had surgery, but the pain never completely went away. He carried that injury with him for the rest of the show's run. This was Richard's first real taste of what Hollywood success could cost him physically. By 1991, the pressure had completely overwhelmed him. He collapsed on set from stress, dehydration, and exhaustion. Doctors said his body was only functioning at 20% capacity. He was completely burned out and begged the studio to let him leave the show. Their response? If he quit, they would sue him for $18 million. He was trapped, forced to keep working even though his health was falling apart. The show he loved had become a prison. After MacGyver ended in 1992, Richard took some time to recover. He did a few smaller projects, including a dark thriller called Through the Eyes of a Killer, where he played a stalker. It was completely different from anything he'd done before and showed fans a much darker side of his acting ability. He also appeared in some comedy projects, including a memorable episode of The Simpsons where he made fun of his own MacGyver image. But the biggest change in Richard's life wasn't professional. It was personal. Throughout his career, he had been known as Hollywood's most eligible bachelor. He dated some famous women, including figure skater Katarina Witt and actress Terry Hatcher, but none of those relationships lasted long. People said he was afraid of commitment, and they were probably right. Then, in 1996, everything changed when he met April Prose. She wasn't a celebrity or actress. She was a wardrobe stylist. After just one date, April called her mother and said she'd met the man she was going to spend her life with. They stayed together for 7 years, and in 1998, their daughter Wiley was born. Richard was 48 when he became a father, and it completely transformed him. Wiley's birth wasn't easy. She didn't breathe when she first came out, and doctors had to rush to save her. When they finally said she was okay, Richard broke down in tears. He later said it was the most overwhelming moment of his life. From that day forward, everything revolved around his daughter. This is where the story takes a turn that explains everything. When Richard was offered the lead role in Stargate SG, one in 1997, he made a demand that shocked everyone at MGM Studios. He didn't want a traditional full-time role. Instead, he demanded a 3-day work week. Friday through Sunday would be completely off-limits, so he could be home with his newborn daughter. The producers thought he was crazy. How do you build a television show around an actor who's only available 3 days a week? But Richard was coming off MacGyver, one of the biggest hits of the past decade. His name alone could bring in millions of viewers. So MGM agreed to his unusual terms. Richard earned $100,000 per episode while working part-time. That 3-day contract became legendary in Hollywood. Other actors tried to negotiate similar deals, but none of them had Richard's leverage. Stargate SG, one became a massive success, running for 10 seasons and making Richard even more famous than MacGyver had. By 2001, his salary had doubled to $200,000 per episode. He was earning over $4 million per season while only working 3 days a week. The show was bringing in over $100 million in international syndication deals. Fan conventions would pay Richard up to $50,000 just to appear for a weekend. But even with this amazing deal, Richard was struggling behind the scenes. Those 3 work days weren't easy. They started at 5 in the morning and didn't end until 7 at night with no breaks. He was drinking 8 to 10 cups of coffee every day just to stay awake. He couldn't sleep without pills. He was meeting with a therapist twice a week because the pressure was crushing him. In 2004, Richard suffered another serious injury while filming. During what should have been a simple running scene, his knee twisted and the ligaments tore. He needed surgery and months of rehabilitation. Doctors told him straight out, "Keep doing physical scenes and you could lose the ability to walk properly." Even now, Richard walks with a slight limp from that injury. Throughout all of the success and struggle, Richard was learning something that most actors never figure out. He was realizing that fame and money weren't making him happy. What made him happy was being a father. What made him happy was quiet time with his daughter. What made him happy was stepping away from the spotlight and just living a normal life. After he and April separated in 2003, Richard became a full-time single father. He didn't complain about it. He embraced it. He took over all the parenting duties, diapers, feedings, everything. He drove Wiley to school every morning and picked her up every afternoon. Even when she was a teenager, he was still doing this. He said waking up at 3 in the morning to check on her was never a burden. The man who had once been called Hollywood's most desirable bachelor had become someone who stayed home, ignored phone calls from agents, and just focused on being a dad. He cried almost every day during Wiley's first year of life. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming love and the realization of how much his priorities had changed. In 2013, Richard made a decision that shocked Hollywood. He quit. At 63 years old, he walked away from the industry completely. His daughter was 15, and he didn't want to miss a single moment of her growing up. His body was tired from years of doing his own stunts. But more importantly, he had learned from his past mistakes. Girlfriends like Terry Hatcher had told him he was never home because of his work. He refused to let his daughter feel the same way. Between 2013 and 2025, Richard turned down more than $23 million in offers. Netflix offered him $15 million for a documentary about his life. He said no. He didn't want his personal life turned into entertainment content. Disney offered $5 million for just 5 Stargate episodes. Paramount offered $3 million for a single MacGyver reboot episode. He didn't even bother to reply to most of these offers. A entertainment news outlet wrote that no actor in Hollywood history has turned down more money, more offers, and more fame than Richard Dean Anderson, and he didn't regret any of it. He said the proposed MacGyver reboot wasn't true to what the original show really represented. He wasn't interested in fake nostalgia or cashing in on past success just for money. In May 2025, at a fan convention in London, Richard did something that shocked everyone who knew him. Instead of giving the usual polite, charming responses that actors give at these events, he told the brutal truth. He called Hollywood a soul-killing machine that only cares about money, not people. Fans were stunned. This was Richard Dean Anderson, the guy who had always been gracious and diplomatic in public. But this time, he didn't hold back. He wasn't selling stardom anymore. He was telling the truth about what the entertainment industry had cost him and why he chose to walk away. The audience was moved to tears. Tickets had sold out, and people came expecting to hear funny stories about MacGyver. Instead, they got an honest look at the price of fame and why sometimes the best choice is to just say no. Today, at 75 years old, Richard lives quietly in Malibu, California. He has an estimated net worth of $30 million. His home alone is worth nearly $10 million, and he pays over $100,000 a year in property taxes. But he's not focused on luxury or showing off his wealth. Instead, he works with environmental groups. He serves on the advisory board of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, helping fight illegal whaling. He supports youth programs and attends only 3 fan events per year. His life now is about peace, presence, and purpose. He didn't retire to escape from something. He retired to be present for something much more important. He chose silence over noise, real life over the spotlight, and above all, he chose to be a father over being famous. So what's the real reason Richard Dean Anderson vanished from Hollywood? It wasn't because he was tired of acting or couldn't get good roles anymore. It wasn't because he was getting old or losing his talent. The real reason is much simpler and much more profound. He figured out what actually matters in life. Richard learned that all the money, fame, and success in the world means nothing if you're not there for the people you love. He learned that Hollywood's definition of success, more money, more fame, more projects, was actually making him miserable and sick. He learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what everyone else thinks you should want. Most actors spend their entire careers chasing the next big role, the next paycheck, the next award. Richard did something almost unthinkable in Hollywood. He chose love over money, family over fame, and peace over pressure. He realized that being a good father was more important than being a famous actor. His story teaches us something important about success and happiness. We live in a world that tells us more is always better. More money, more recognition, more stuff. But Richard's life proves that sometimes the best choice is less. Less work stress, less public pressure, less time away from the people who matter most. Richard Dean Anderson didn't vanish from Hollywood because he had to. He vanished because he wanted to. He made a conscious choice to prioritize his daughter, his health, and his peace of mind over everything else the entertainment industry had to offer. And looking at his life today, surrounded by nature, working on causes he believes in, and having raised a daughter who knew her father was always there for her, it's hard to argue he made the wrong choice. That's the real reason Richard Dean Anderson disappeared from Hollywood. He didn't lose his way. He found it. He discovered that the most important role he would ever play wasn't MacGyver or Colonel O'Neill. It was being a father, and he played that role better than any character he ever brought to screen. If this story moved you or changed how you think about success and priorities, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message about what really matters in life. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories about the people behind your favorite shows and movies. What do you think about Richard's choice? Was he right to walk away from millions of dollars to focus on being a dad? Let me know in the comments below.